Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we've got a major 4680 battery production update. We've also got a new product introduced by Tesla, wraps for vehicles. Take a look at those. We've got a business unit sale and a few other items as well. All right, looking at the stock, Tesla down about 0.25% today, closing at $262.99. The NASDAQ, pretty nice day, up 0.7%, and that was despite the producer price index or PPI report coming in a little bit higher than expectations this morning. So from Bloomberg, we can see the recap here. The producer price index headline number was up 0.5% month over month versus expectations of about 0.3%. And core, so excluding food and energy, that was up 0.3% versus expectations of about 0.2%. So with that being a little bit higher, normally you'd expect maybe a little bit of a subdued reaction with the market, as that could lead to higher interest rates later on if PPI stays a little bit higher. Obviously, these aren't really too far outside of the range, but still would like to see them probably coming down a little bit further. Anyway, if we look at the CME Group's Fed Watch tool, we can see that actually over the last day and over the last week, certainly, expectations for a continuation of paused interest rates at the next FOMC meeting in November have actually increased. So despite the higher PPI results, still more market expectations for rates to stay the same. So what seems to be going on here is just based on some recent Fed commentary, as we can see from a New York Times article today. It looks like there have been comments that sort of indicate that maybe the Fed is still kind of thinking pause, and it seems to be outweighing the results that we saw here from the producer price index. So we'll see. CPI will be tomorrow. We'll see if that kind of comes in similarly, but we'll keep an eye on that. All right, getting into the news for Tesla, kind of an exciting update here. Tesla has shared on X that they have just built their 20 millionth 4680 cell at Giga Texas. So we last heard an update from Tesla on this outside of the commentary that they shared on the Q2 call back in June 16th, so a little bit less than 4 months ago. Tesla had produced their 10 millionth cell at Giga Texas. So at the time, we weren't 100% sure if that meant 10 millionth 4680 in total or 10 millionth specifically at Texas. We leaned more towards the latter, just that it was Texas production, which seems to have been the case based on Tesla's Q2 earnings call comments. So presumably this is still the same. This would be 20 millionth just at Giga Texas rather than 20 millionth total produced at Giga Texas. So a little bit unclear, but that is again where I lean on this update pretty strongly. So nice to see this. Obviously 10 million cells in the last, again, just a little bit over a quarter. That's a little bit less than a gigawatt hour. So that would mean a little bit less than a 4 gigawatt hour annual run rate over that period. However, obviously this should be something that is ramping over time. So now that we're in October, this should actually suggest a higher run rate than that. To take a look at that, we've got some good forecasting or extrapolating that was done from Jordan Giesecke of The Limiting Factor. Always a fan of his work. He actually put a forecast out, or extrapolation out of Tesla's growth rates in the second quarter. If that kind of continued, basically up 21% month over month, that would lead to the 20 millionth cell being produced in pretty early October and right on schedule with that previous growth rate. That's where we've ended up. So really great job forecasting that out here. And with some of the other math that Jordan has done with that extrapolation, that would suggest that right now Tesla is roughly right around a 5 gigawatt hour annual run rate on 4680s just at Texas. And again, if that kind of continues to grow, we're almost doubling that, that run rate quarter over quarter. A little bit less than that, but pretty close to it. So very exciting growth in terms of the 4680 production. Nice to see that growth has stayed on track. And that's kind of despite Tesla, as they talked about on the Q2 call, really starting to do the next generation, what they're calling the cyber cell, with 10% greater energy density, starting to get that ramped up. So obviously for 5 gigawatt hours, the big question is, can that support the Cybertruck ramp? Is this going to be a limiting factor for the Cybertruck ramp? 5 gigawatt hours, depending on the pack size of the Cybertruck, where that falls, somewhere probably between 100 kilowatt hours and 200 kilowatt hours, then you're looking at, 25,000 to 50,000 sort of run rate that could support. So it should be enough cells right now at this level of production to support the early ramp of the Cybertruck, as long as Tesla is hitting their, sort of energy density requirements and things like that. Then we should have enough cells here for the initial part of the ramp, which is really good news. And hopefully this will continue to ramp at, a similar pace here and be able to continue to support that as Tesla gets the rest of the Cybertruck up to speed. But good to see that at least right now that doesn't appear like it would be something that would be a major constraint in terms of the ramp. So I'm sure we'll get a little bit more color on this on the Q3 call here in a little bit less than a week, or I guess a week from today. I'm sure Tesla will talk about it and hopefully share a little bit more details on that. But very exciting to see this milestone, and glad to see that the progress that we saw in Q2, which was pretty substantial, has now continued and become even more substantial here in the third quarter. All right, next, kind of the interesting update that we got from Tesla last night. They've added a new product to the Tesla shop. So this is color wraps. They also have a clear wrap option that's a little bit cheaper, but color wraps for the Model 3 and the Model Y that are between $7,500 and $8,000. So they're not actually in the design studio, not a part of the order configuration. However, this would be done after delivery at a service center. Right now, Tesla says that this is only available at 2 service centers in California, so pretty limited in terms of the scope or availability at this point. But Tesla is offering, I think, 7 different colors here. You know, you can kind of go and flip through those if you want on the Tesla shop page. But an interesting new option, of course. Obviously, the question is Tesla doing this in preparation for the Cybertruck? And I think there would be, you know, some pretty strong relation in that. Certainly timing-wise, there seems to be. And we've obviously seen Tesla do a lot of wraps with the prototype vehicles, which they seem to kind of been testing out. So I would like to see them, if they kind of, you know, go further into this direction, I would like to see it be a factory option where you're not doing it necessarily at the service center. But I think Tesla probably right now is doing this on the 3 and the Y in sort of a test or a small scale way, just to kind of see how that'll play out with the Cybertruck. So there's been a lot of discussion on the costs here. $8,000, obviously that's significantly more expensive than any of the paint options Tesla has. It's more expensive than wrapping a vehicle would be just aftermarket with a vinyl wrap, but something that's important to note is that this is basically a PPF or paint protective film wrap. So Tesla specifies here self-healing urethane-based film protects the paint beneath from chips, scratches, and swirling, if I could read today. But one of the, you know, this is what I've actually got on my car as PPF, obviously not a colored version of it. So you're actually getting kind of a wrap aesthetic with the paint protective film, which is a pretty significant difference from vinyl. So when I got my car wrapped, I did a video on this. It was a couple years ago now, but I did link to that in the description if you just want to kind of see a little bit more behind the scenes on that. Obviously, you can see from this shot right here, I don't know specifically what film Tesla is using, but it is pretty strong and protective, obviously, as the name implies, of the vehicle. So a little bit more value than something like a vinyl wrap would be, which is, you know, just kind of more of a color version or, you know, color option, versus this is actually very protective of the paint. So kind of interesting to see that. And again, I think that plays into what we'll see with the Cybertruck. Tesla Scope had shared on X that they have been told that Tesla will offer a Cybertruck wrap service, so no surprise, but it sounds like that'll happen within the first 6 months of customer deliveries. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And I would imagine Tesla's probably got some kind of interesting ideas there for the Cybertruck, as we've seen again on those prototypes. All right, next up we've got a new EV survey. So we talked about one of these probably a few weeks ago now at this point, but kind of similar results. So this is a new poll from Ipsos and Yahoo Finance. It says that 57% of respondents, I think they surveyed just over 1,000 people, I believe, again, a representative sample, but 57% of respondents answered that they are not likely to purchase an electric vehicle as their next car, with concerns about cost, driving range, and lack of charging stations among the top concerns. And kind of interestingly, the poll also found that of the brands they would be most likely to purchase for an EV, Toyota actually stood at the top at 30%, with Tesla second at 23%. So good to see Tesla up there. Maybe a little bit surprising to see Toyota at 30% above there, but this actually misreports on what the actual question was. If we look at it in a little bit more detail, the actual question was, when thinking about purchasing a fully electric or plug-in hybrid EV, which automakers are you most likely to consider? So I think when you throw a plug-in hybrid EV, that completely changes things, certainly for Toyota, at least in terms of perception. So maybe a little bit less surprising to see these kind of results. However, what I actually thought was most interesting with these survey results was that only 30% of people that responded were familiar with programs like the federal EV tax credit. So again, you've got 7 out of 10 potential customers that don't necessarily understand that they could be getting $7,500 off potentially That's a huge difference. And then only 20% of buyers were familiar with recent price cuts of electric vehicles, obviously significantly from Tesla. So you've got, 80% of people not really understanding that there have been these significant price cuts. We're talking 20% here. And then, another 70% of people that don't know you can get another 15% off. So there's no surprise there that sometimes the perception is that a Model Y or a Model 3 costs $70,000, $80,000, without this understanding. So it kind of supports the survey that we talked about again a couple of weeks ago. It's just a survey. You can't necessarily take a ton away from it, but there does seem to be a pretty strong indication that there are gaps in understanding in terms of what the actual situation is for EVs right now, even just with pricing. And that's sort of step one, right? Like if they don't even know how much the car costs, how are they supposed to understand things like the charging network and all else that comes along with actually owning an EV? So it would be nice to see some, increased awareness out there, and hopefully Tesla can help drive that through various ways. All right, next we've just got a quick update on China numbers. So we'd previously talked about wholesale sales for September. So those came in at about 74,000. So that's export and retail. We now have the breakdown of that. Previously it had been indicated that there was a little over 30,000 exported. We now have that final number, 30,566, which leaves 43,507 retail or domestic sales for China for September. So obviously a little bit of a dip from what we had seen in August, which was a relatively high number, but still a pretty strong result there for the end of the month, especially when we consider the lack of availability on the Model 3. We don't need to spend much time on this because, again, the most interesting number for us for September is going to be that Model 3 production number, which we still don't have. So hopefully we'll get that in the next couple of days, and as soon as we do, we'll keep an eye out for it, or I'll pass it along. Speaking of Model 3 Highland, we've got an update from Wuhua again at the port in Shanghai. Continue to see just rows and rows and rows and rows of Model 3 Highland, which is exciting and hopefully shows, that Tesla is proceeding through this ramp pretty quickly. So again, we'll look out for that production number, which will give us our first real clue at some of those numbers, outside of obviously the photos here. All right, next we've got an update from Tesla Hong Kong on X that the first V4 Supercharger has now opened in Asia. So we've been talking about this over the last few days for US V4 Superchargers. Obviously, originally these were being installed only in Europe pretty slowly. Now we've seen a handful in the US. Now we're seeing one in Asia. So it really does look like the V4 Supercharger ramp is happening in pretty full force. So good to see that. I'm sure we'll continue to see that expand. All right, next we've got kind of an interesting update here. We've talked about Tesla's acquisition of Wiferion a couple of times now. So this was a relatively small acquisition for Tesla, but it looks like they had something in mind here pretty specifically, because they have now already sold this off to Pulse, which has announced that they have acquired Wiferion. So Tesla acquiring this company and then just a few months later selling it to Pulse. It looks like Tesla has done this just to maintain the engineers from Wiferion. So the Robot Report noting that according to a source with knowledge of both of these acquisitions, the engineers will remain at Tesla, not included with the deal. So pretty much an acqui-hire from Tesla that they took what they needed, and now we're flipping out the rest of the company to someone that wants the other parts. So interesting to see that, but I guess always nice to see some talented engineers joining Tesla, however it is accomplished. All right, next we do have an update on the earnings call. So Say Technologies has now published the Q&A for the earnings call for next week, so shareholders can go ask and vote on questions to be asked at that meeting. Right now, it looks like, V12, Cybertruck, 4680 ramp are kind of in the top slots, which I think all those topics are very interesting to get more details on. I'm sure with Cybertruck, Tesla's going to have a lot to talk about, and hopefully we'll hear some pretty major updates even before we get to the Q&A. But if you do want to go participate in that, that is at, again, saytechnologies.com. And then we've got an interesting update here from Automotive News on gigapresses. So obviously we've seen what Tesla has done with gigapress over the years. Looks like now other automakers are kind of getting on board. So the report is that there's been a gigapress 6100 spotted with Ford branding on it. So maybe not too surprising to see Ford kind of stepping in that way. They seem to be one of the, at least the faster followers in terms of their intent or their efforts, at least in terms of Tesla. So it looks like they're at least testing out a 6,000 ton press. And then Idra also reporting that a 9,000 ton press has been spotted as well, not without branding printed on it, but apparently a source is indicating that that is actually going to Hyundai. So a 6,000 ton over to Ford, 9,000 ton over to Hyundai, and it sounds like there's 2 other 9,000 ton presses that are going to a quote-unquote premium automaker in Europe. And sources also indicated that Volvo had previously purchased 2 gigapresses from Idra. We don't know the size on those ones, at least from this report, but interesting to see kind of all of a sudden a lot of these different automakers lining up and becoming purchasers of gigapresses at similar scales, maybe not in terms of the unit count, but in terms of the capability of the gigapress what Tesla is doing. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it seems like they're at least investing in it for R&D and maybe beyond a little bit later. And then finally for today, a really interesting update from the UAW. Kind of out of nowhere tonight, they've announced that they have increased or expanded the strike at Ford. So 8,700 workers, pretty significant increase here, have now striked. I don't know what the correct verbiage here would be, but the Kentucky truck plant. So this is significant. This is, these more significant plants had been sort of excluded from previous strikes, but this has very profitable lineup for Ford, including full-size SUVs, heavy-duty F-Series pickup trucks. So I guess what happened here is that Ford and the UAW were having a negotiation session tonight. Sounds like Ford came to the negotiation session with pretty much the exact same offer that they had previously presented. And after a brief discussion that lasted only a few minutes, according to this report, Sean Fain, president of the UAW, stood up and said something along the lines of, if that's all you've got, you just lost KTP, or the Kentucky truck plant. So a pretty major escalation here in terms of the UAW. They will have another update on Friday, as they usually do. But this is, again, a major plant for Ford. Apparently, this produces about $25 billion of annual revenue for Ford, which would be about 1/6 of its overall global revenue. So again, so far we've kind of seen these littler strikes trying to not necessarily maximize impact, and now the UAW getting much more aggressive with those strikes at this plant, at least for Ford. So we'll keep an eye on that, and again, we should hear another update on that on Friday. All right, that'll wrap it up for today then. So as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also find me on X at Tesla Podcast. And we'll see you tomorrow for the Thursday, October 12th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.